In 16th century Istanbul, inside Topkapı Palace, the Ottoman Empire turned enslaved women into some of its most powerful political players. Tonight, guards escort you through locked palace doors, because one wrong alliance can turn the Sultan's favorite woman into a corpse. And that's the insane part. You arrived with almost nothing. Not freedom, not family, not political power, and sometimes not even control over your own future. But inside the Ottoman Harem, a woman could climb from slavery to extraordinary influence. If you caught the Sultan's attention, survived the jealousy, produced a powerful son, built the right alliances, and avoided being quietly pushed aside, you could command servants, control enormous wealth, influence imperial decisions, and sometimes terrify the men supposedly running the empire. But screw up? Yeah, that same palace could swallow you. Because the harem wasn't just a collection of beautiful women waiting around for a ruler. It was a political machine, and you were one of its moving parts. You usually entered the system as an enslaved girl or young woman, often brought from regions around the Black Sea, the Caucasus, or southeastern Europe. You were converted to Islam if you weren't already Muslim, trained in language, manners, religion, music, household skills, and palace etiquette. Then you learned the first rule. Someone was always watching. Older women supervised you. Eunuchs controlled access. Palace officials managed the household. And above everyone stood the Sultan's mother once her son ruled. You might think becoming the Sultan's favorite solved everything. Oh no, that was when things got dangerous. Take Hürrem Sultan. She was probably born Ruthenian and entered the Ottoman palace as an enslaved woman sometime in the early 16th century. Her original name is uncertain. What isn't uncertain is that she became the favorite of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent. And Hürrem didn't stay a favorite, she became his wife. That mattered because Ottoman sultans had generally relied on concubines rather than formal dynastic marriages. Hürrem's marriage to Süleyman was a major break with earlier custom. Suddenly, an enslaved woman who had entered the palace with no political family behind her had something even better: the Sultan's personal trust. And trust inside a palace is basically a loaded weapon. Hürrem gave Suleyman several children, including future Sultan Selim II. She exchanged letters with Süleyman while he was away on campaign. She built charitable foundations and major architectural projects. Her name carried weight far beyond the locked rooms of the harem. But power creates enemies. One of the most famous victims of this struggle was Prince Mustafa, Süleyman's son by another woman, Mahidevran. Mustafa was widely seen as a serious candidate for the throne. Hürrem's sons stood behind him in the line of succession, and here the Ottoman system gets brutally simple. There was no comfortable retirement plan for rival princes. When a new sultan took power, rival brothers could become threats to the state, and therefore threats to the new ruler's life. Ottoman succession could become a bloodbath dressed up as political necessity. Mustafa was executed in 1553 on his father's orders during a military campaign. The exact degree of Hürrem's involvement in the events leading to his death has been debated for centuries. So we shouldn't invent a secret mastermind scene that nobody can prove. But politically, his death changed everything. Hürrem's enemies were weakened. Her own sons now had a clearer path: Jesus. Imagine understanding that your child's future might depend on which other children survive. And Hürrem wasn't some accidental survivor who just happened to get lucky. She understood how palace power worked. You didn't need to sit on the throne yourself. Sometimes, you only needed to control who could reach the man sitting on it. That's the trick. The harem was physically separated from much of the outside world, but politically it wasn't isolated at all. Messages moved, gifts moved. Appointments could be influenced, marriages were arranged, networks formed around mothers, daughters, eunuchs, officials, and princes. The locked door wasn't the end of politics, it was the entrance. And after Hürrem came an era historians often call the Sultanate of Women, when several royal women exercised remarkable influence in Ottoman government. especially during the 16th and 17th centuries. One of the strongest was Kosem Sultan. Like Hurrem, Kosem entered the palace as an enslaved woman and became the favorite of Sultan Ahmed I. She had children with him, including future sultans Murad IV and Ibrahim. Then Ahmed died, and now things could have gone very badly. Because being the favorite of a dead sultan is not the same as being the mother of the sultan. Your entire position could collapse overnight. The wrong prince could take the throne. Another faction could take control. You could lose your rooms, your servants, your money, your protection. But Kosem survived. Then her son Murad IV became sultan while still a child. And suddenly, Kosem wasn't just an influential palace woman. She became the lead sultan, the sultan's mother, and served as regent during his minority. Now imagine the transformation. You entered as property. Years later, imperial officials were dealing with decisions made under your authority. Okay, that's insane. But Kosem's real strength was that she survived more than one reign. She remained politically important through the reigns of Murad IV and Ibrahim, then returned to power when her grandson Mehmed IV became sultan as a child. That kind of survival required something more than beauty or luck. You needed allies, and you needed to know when an ally was becoming a problem. Because Ottoman palace politics had one nasty habit. The closer you got to power, the more people wanted your position. Kosem's final enemy was Turhan Sultan, another woman who had also entered the imperial system as an enslaved concubine. Turhan was the mother of Mehmed IV. So now the empire had two powerful women connected to the same young sultan. One was his grandmother, the other was his mother. Yeah, that was never going to stay peaceful. Kosem had experience, networks, wealth, and years of political connections. Turhan had something equally dangerous. She was the mother of the reigning sultan. The struggle escalated inside the palace. According to the historical accounts generally associated with Kosem's final days, her enemies learned of a plan involving replacing Mehmed IV with another prince, though details and motivations vary between accounts. What is clear is how it ended. In 1651, Kosem Sultan was killed inside the palace, strangled. After decades of surviving Ottoman succession crises, palace intrigue, executions, shifting alliances, and the deaths of rulers, the woman who had effectively governed during multiple reigns was killed not on a battlefield, not by a foreign army, but inside the palace world that had made her powerful. God, imagine realizing nobody is coming. That's the dark contradiction at the center of these women's stories. The Ottoman Harem could turn an enslaved woman into a political force, unlike almost anything available to most women of her time. But the system never stopped being dangerous. You gained power because you were close to the Sultan. Then you became vulnerable because everyone else knew you were close to the Sultan. You had money? Someone wanted control of it. You had a son? His brothers became potential rivals. You influenced appointments? Officials started choosing sides. You became indispensable? Heh, congratulations. Now you're also a threat. And the most powerful position wasn't always being the Sultan's lover. Sometimes the real prize was surviving long enough to become the Sultan's mother. Because a Sultan could replace a favorite, he couldn't replace the woman who gave birth to him. That gave women like Hürrem, Kosem, and later Turhan extraordinary opportunities. They created charitable institutions, financed major buildings, managed vast households, corresponded with political figures, and became part of the machinery of empire. But let's not romanticize this. They gained power inside a system built on hierarchy, slavery, dynastic survival, and absolute monarchy. Their rise didn't mean the system suddenly became fair. It meant they learned how to use its rules better than the people trying to destroy them. And sometimes those rules demanded blood. Prince Mustafa died in a succession struggle shaped by the politics surrounding Suleiman's household. Kosem was eventually murdered after spending decades at the center of imperial power. Turhan survived her and became one of the dominant figures around Mehmed IV's early reign. One woman rises, Another woman falls. Then the next generation steps over the body. That's the Ottoman Harem without the fantasy version. Not a soft prison full of silk cushions and perfume. Not a place where every woman simply waited for romance. It was a brutal political ecosystem where a woman could begin as an enslaved outsider and eventually influence one of the most powerful empires on earth. But there was always a price. You could spend 30 years building your position. You could survive jealous rivals, dead husbands, executed princes, rebellious soldiers, and palace conspiracies. Then one night, you hear boots outside. Then the keys, the footsteps stop at your door. And after all those years, after everything you survived, the palace that turned you into one of the most powerful women in the Ottoman Empire might finally decide you're the next person who has to disappear.